The laughter started before he even sat down. It was light at first, the kind that pretends to be polite, but it grew sharper with every second he stood there holding a worn leather folder and a coffee-stained resume. He could feel it in the air, that familiar judgment, the unspoken verdict already passed. A single father in a creased jacket, arriving 5 minutes early because he could not afford to be late, stepping into a glass tower built by people who had never counted coins at a grocery checkout. In that moment, as the doors closed behind him and the room filled with quiet amusement, he understood something deeply painful. They were not laughing at his skills. They were laughing at the life they assumed he had failed at. He had rehearsed this moment for weeks, whispering answers while washing dishes late at night, practicing confidence while his daughter slept in the next room. Every word had been chosen carefully, every example drawn from years of invisible struggle, but none of that mattered when the first thing they saw was a man who looked tired, a man whose eyes carried the weight of responsibility instead of ambition. He could almost hear their thoughts. This is not our kind of success. This is not someone who belongs here. His name was Daniel, and 5 years earlier he had been a rising star in a mid-sized tech firm. Not famous, not wealthy, but respected. Then life shifted without warning. A sudden illness took his wife in a matter of months, leaving him with a 3-year-old daughter and a silence that screamed every night after bedtime. The grief was suffocating, but the bills were relentless. Promotions no longer came easily when daycare pickups mattered more than after-hours networking. Eventually, restructuring took his job, and just like that, his professional identity vanished along with his personal one. What followed were years of quiet resilience. Daniel learned to measure success differently. Success became packing lunches before sunrise. Success became solving math homework after 10-hour shifts. Success became staying calm when the world felt like it was collapsing. He took freelance work, short contracts, anything that allowed him to be home when his daughter needed him. In the process, he learned something no classroom ever taught him. He learned how to solve problems under pressure, how to think clearly when stakes were high and time was short. He learned how to make decisions when failure was not an option. The company he now stood before was massive, admired, and currently unraveling. Their stock had dipped for the first time in years, their flagship product bleeding money due to inefficiencies no one could pinpoint. Consultants had come and gone, armed with presentations and polished jargon, leaving behind nothing but invoices. Inside the room sat executives who had never doubted their intelligence until now. They were desperate, but pride kept them from admitting it. Daniel did not know all of this when he walked in. He only knew that this interview represented something fragile and precious. Stability, a chance to stop living contract to contract, a chance to tell his daughter that things were finally going to be okay. When the questions began, they were predictable, almost dismissive. Gaps in employment, short-term roles, lack of corporate continuity. Each question felt less like curiosity and more like confirmation of their assumptions. Daniel answered calmly, without defensiveness, explaining choices without apology. He spoke of flexibility, of responsibility, of learning fast because life had demanded it. The smiles in the room did not fade. Then something unexpected happened. One of the executives mentioned, almost offhandedly, the crisis that had been haunting them for months. A supply chain bottleneck that no model could fix. A data mismatch that cost them millions every quarter. It was not meant as a test, just a complaint shared among peers. Daniel listened, truly listened, the way someone listens when they have learned that details matter. He asked a single question, not loudly, not arrogantly, just carefully. The room shifted. He followed with another, then another, building a quiet map in his mind. Years of managing chaos had trained his brain to spot patterns others missed. He did not interrupt. He did not perform. He simply thought. When he finally spoke, his voice was steady. He explained the issue in simple terms, stripping away complexity until the core was exposed. The problem was not the system they had built, but the assumption behind it. They were optimizing for speed instead of flow, treating symptoms instead of causes. He described a solution that required no new software, no massive overhaul, just a reordering of priorities, and a small structural change no one had considered, because it seemed too obvious. The laughter was gone now, replaced by silence. Not awkward silence, but the kind that arrives when truth enters a room unexpectedly. One executive leaned forward, another frowned, then nodded slowly. Someone asked him to repeat the explanation. Daniel did, calmly, without embellishment. He had explained far more complex things to a tired child at midnight. This was easier. Within minutes, the room felt different. Questions turned sharper, more engaged. What would implementation look like? How long before results? What risks existed? Daniel answered honestly, acknowledging uncertainty while outlining contingencies. He did not promise miracles. He promised clarity. The CEO, who had been quiet until now, finally spoke. There was no laughter in his voice, only curiosity, edged with relief. He asked Daniel where he had learned to think like this. Daniel paused, then answered simply. Life taught him. Responsibility taught him. Being the only one someone else could depend on taught him. When the interview ended, no one escorted him out with polite smiles. They walked him to the door, still asking questions, still thinking aloud. Daniel stepped back into the elevator feeling disoriented. unsure whether he had just impressed them or crossed some invisible line. He did not allow himself hope. Hope had taught him to be cautious. The call came the next morning, not from HR, but from the CEO himself. The solution Daniel proposed had already been tested overnight. Early indicators were promising. The company wanted him, not just as an employee, but as the lead on restructuring the entire process. The offer was more than money. It was trust. That Daniel sat on the edge of his bed after the call ended, staring at the wall while his daughter slept in the next room. Tears came quietly, not from joy alone, but from release. Years of being overlooked, underestimated, and dismissed had finally cracked open, not because he demanded recognition, but because he stayed ready when opportunity arrived. The weeks that followed were intense. Daniel worked harder than he ever had, not to prove himself, but to honor the chance he had been given. He listened more than he spoke, invited perspectives that had long been ignored, and built solutions that valued people over ego. Slowly, the crisis unraveled. Costs dropped, efficiency rose, confidence returned. Inside the company, the story spread. The single dad who solved the man who did not look like a savior but acted like one. Daniel never corrected the narrative, but he never leaned into it either. He focused on the work, on coming home in time for dinner, on being present in both worlds, without losing himself. One evening, months later, as he tucked his daughter into bed, she asked him why he smiled more now. Daniel told her the truth in the simplest way he could. Sometimes people do not see your value until you show it. And sometimes, you do not need to shout. You just need to be ready. The transformation was not just professional. Daniel began to see himself differently. Not as someone who had fallen behind, but as someone who had taken a harder path and survived it. The laughter he once feared no longer held power over him. It was just noise from people who had never been tested in the same way. Years later, Daniel would sit in that same interview room, now redesigned, now warmer, interviewing candidates others dismissed too quickly. He listened closely to unconventional stories, to broken resumes, to quiet confidence. He knew what lived beneath the surface of struggle. He knew potential often hides behind exhaustion. This story is not about a miracle solution or a lucky break. It is about preparation, meeting dismissal, about resilience meeting opportunity. It is about the quiet strength built in moments no one applauds. If you have ever felt laughed at, underestimated, or invisible because your life does not fit a neat narrative, remember this. Your experiences are not weaknesses. They are tools waiting for the right moment. Stay ready. Stay humble. Stay moving forward, even when the world doubts you. And when your moment comes, let your actions speak louder than any laughter ever could. The applause came quietly this time, not as sound but as results. Numbers on dashboards turned green, crisis meetings disappeared from calendars, and the tension that once lived in the hallways slowly loosened its grip. For the first time in months, people inside the company breathed without realizing they had been holding their breath. Daniel watched it all from a distance, not out of arrogance, but habit. When you spend years surviving, you learn not to celebrate too early. Success did not arrive as fireworks. It arrived as longer days, heavier responsibility, and a deeper test of character. The same people who once laughed now praised him publicly, but Daniel noticed something else beneath their words. Expectation. They no longer wanted a solution. They wanted a savior. And that weight, heavier than poverty or rejection, settled on his shoulders. At home, his daughter noticed the change before anyone else. The late nights returned, though for a different reason now. Daniel tried to shield her from the pressure, but children sense storms before adults name them. One night, as he helped her with homework, she asked if he was scared again. The question stopped him. He realized that fear had never left. It had only changed its clothes. Inside the company, resistance quietly formed. Not everyone welcomed change led by someone who did not come from their world. Executives nodded in meetings, then hesitated in execution. Old power structures do not collapse easily. Some felt threatened by Daniel's influence. Others embarrassed that answers came from someone they had underestimated. Emails went unanswered. Decisions stalled. Progress slowed. The CEO noticed. He trusted Daniel, but trust alone could not rewrite years of corporate culture. One afternoon, he called Daniel into his office and spoke plainly. The solution had worked, but the system still resisted him. Leadership, the CEO said, was not just about being right. It was about being accepted. That night, Daniel sat alone at his kitchen table long after his daughter slept. He stared at the same bills he once feared, now paid but not forgotten. He thought about walking away, about choosing peace over power. But then he remembered the interview room, the laughter, the assumptions. He remembered every time someone like him was dismissed before being heard. Walking away would be easy. Staying would matter. The next morning, Daniel changed his approach. He stopped leading from the front and started leading from within. He invited critics into conversations instead of outmaneuvering them. He gave credit publicly, Even when ideas originated with him, he asked questions instead of delivering answers. Slowly, defensiveness softened into trust. Then came the second crisis, bigger than the first. A competitor leaked misinformation that triggered panic in the market. Stock prices fell overnight. Media pressure exploded. Board members demanded immediate action. Old fear returned to the building like a familiar ghost. Daniel did not rush. He gathered data, listened carefully, and noticed what others missed again. The panic was not about numbers. It was about confidence. The company needed transparency, not spin. While advisors pushed aggressive responses, Daniel recommended something radical: honesty. He proposed addressing employees and investors directly, admitting uncertainty while presenting a clear path forward. No inflated promises, no rehearsed arrogance, just truth, responsibility, and direction. The room hesitated. Vulnerability felt risky, but panic was already winning. They trusted him. The message went out, clear, human. Markets stabilized within days. Internally, something even more powerful happened. People felt seen, valued, protected. Loyalty replaced fear. That was the moment Daniel understood his real transformation. He was no longer just solving problems. He was shaping culture. And culture, once changed, outlives any single victory. At home, his daughter framed a drawing she made for him. It showed a small figure holding a much smaller hand, standing in front of a tall building. Under it, she had written one simple word she learned at school: brave. Daniel smiled longer than he had in years. The man who once doubted his place now created space for others. He hired parents with gaps in resumes, people with unconventional paths, talent hidden behind hardship. The laughter never returned, not because people became kinder, but because results made judgment irrelevant. This is where part 2 truly ends. Not with applause, promotions, or headlines, but with quiet confidence. With a man who turned survival into leadership, pain into clarity, and responsibility into strength. If you are watching this while feeling underestimated, overwhelmed, or unsure of your worth, remember this: your hardest seasons are not delays, they are training. Stay ready, stay human, and when your moment comes, rise without forgetting who you were when no one believed in you. If this story inspired you, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. More powerful stories are coming, stories that remind us that real success is built in silence before it's ever seen in the light.